Hello, everybody, and welcome to History Inscribed, where we talk about real asset collecting and investing, especially paper assets. Now, today we're going to talk about a fundamental topic, which is assets versus liabilities. This may not be the most fun topic that we might discuss, but it is absolutely crucial. It is foundational. To have financial success, I've found that at the core of all of that, it basically boils down to owning assets. This is what rich people do, and this is what rich people do not teach the rest of us through public school. Now, I do have to provide a financial disclaimer on this, because we are talking about such a financial topic today. I am not a financial advisor, have no official training, I'm not an expert. You should not listen to me for anything. I do have to provide a secondary disclaimer too, because I don't want to make it sound like I am a money-grubbing aristocrat or anything. I'm just solely focused on material wealth. That's not what I'm saying here. We are compartmentalizing today. In terms of what we're talking about here. Okay. Because when I say asset, today I'm just talking about from a financial perspective. There are certainly many assets in your life that are more important. You may say, my family is my greatest asset. My health, my faith, my pets, my morality. I get it. And I agree with that. There are more important things, but we're just talking about from a financial perspective today when we use the term assets. So I want to write a statement down that I've found to be true. If you want to know the biggest difference I've found, besides being born with capital, inherited, and connections, which are incredibly important, but besides that, which you can't control, the biggest thing I've found that the rich do separately from the rest of us is that they buy assets with other people's money. Also, they rarely sell them. In fact, they will use leverage on those assets to acquire more assets. If they sell them, it's usually to buy better assets. Or sometimes they get into a pinch, they have to sell their assets, but once they get out of that pinch, they'll go right back to buying assets again. And like I said, this is what we're not taught in school, especially public school. Most people aren't really taught this at all, actually. They do tend to pick this up if you come from a wealthy family that does this, though. You'll tend to pick it up. And if you go to elite private schools, you'll tend to pick this up from your peer group instead of this actually being taught anywhere. But I learned this a little too late in life, but still I learned it mostly from reading classic business books like The Richest Man in Babylon, Think and Grow Rich, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, those kind of books, which you may not agree with all of them. You may think some of them are a little bit scammy. I understand, but we're focusing on a core concept here that I don't think too many people could argue with. Okay, now what is an asset? According to my definition here, this may not be the Webster's dictionary definition. An asset is something that at least holds its value, and possibly gains relative to inflation. Where, for purposes of this video, liability is just the opposite. A liability is something you buy that heads towards zero. It may not get to zero, but it's heading down there. I think the dictionary definition is something that actually costs you money regularly, but for purposes of this video, I'm just separating things broadly into things that you buy that hold their value relative to inflation and can reasonably expected to appreciate even. A liability, on the other hand, will trend downward almost predictably, almost certainly. There is risk to everything, and so nobody knows 100%, but we have a lot of data, we have a lot of knowledge from people who came before us. We can kind of tell which items are going to function as assets versus liabilities. Okay, now here's something we need to understand. We still need liabilities. If you came to me and said, I'm going to stop buying all liabilities, I'm only going to buy assets, you would not survive very long because there are plenty of liabilities that we do need. But my point of this entire video is that we need to start, number one, asking ourselves when we buy something, which category this falls into. And to the extent we're able, we need to take that money that we're spending on liabilities and start converting it into assets. Because when you buy something, you pay money, and you buy a liability, you actually do spend that money. When you buy an asset with money, you're actually converting it. You're not really spending it per se, you're actually converting it into another form. And that is the key difference. Okay, so let's talk about some examples of what these are. We can separate the liabilities into essential and non-essential. You remember the episode of The Office where Oscar goes into Michael Scott's office and he makes him a spreadsheet and he separates his spending into things you need, things you don't need, and things absolutely nobody has ever needed at any point in human history. Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here. We need essential liabilities such as basic food, fuel, basic clothing, insurance, utilities, you might need, a personal computer and software, tools, things like that. We need these things. Even so, they are liabilities. Once we purchase them, their value declines. It's difficult to sell them again. If we can't even sell them, we're not getting our money back. But then there are also these non-essential liabilities here. And this is where most people's wealth is actually being drained. They're spending their money on things like concerts, streaming, luxury items, trips Consumer electronics, that's a big one. And these things depreciate greatly. They basically go to zero over time. And they're not good purchases in general. We do need to buy some of these because we are human. We do want entertainment and so forth, but one of the biggest things that could fix a lot of people's financial problems is starting to really think about the non-essentials liabilities that they're purchasing. This is the whole avocado toast thing that's been popular in the media for like the last 10 years, saying, oh, just stop buying Starbucks and avocado toast and you'll be fine. I realize that it's actually pretty hard to do these days. A lot of people have already cut down to the bone, but we need to start thinking about this. Now, when we go onto the asset side here, most people, the asset they own are stocks and bonds, which is good. However, most people own these through their employer. If it wasn't through their employer in 401k, they probably wouldn't own these. And that's still good, but they're not really in an asset mindset. It's kind of the new savings account where your employer does this for you. You buy a broad index fund, an ETF, a targeted date retirement fund. It kind of matches inflation plus a few percent maybe. It's not really the same as being an asset-minded individual. It is kind of the new savings account. And it is good. It is an asset, don't get me wrong. But there needs to be a greater mindset shift if we're going to break out of this trap that many people and their families have been in for generations. Also, real estate. Not really including your primary residence, and I know that's a big point of contention, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Collectibles, that's what this channel's about. And it can be hard to know for certain if an item that you think is a collectible is actually going to be a collectible and actually going to function as a collectible, but that's a whole nother topic. Royalties, like if you write a book, you get passive income from that, or you invest in some kind of business that pays royalties, things like that. In businesses, of course, if you own and operate a business, that would certainly count as an asset. Now, there is kind of a hybrid category. This is where a lot of people will just argue for hours and hours, but it's not so much about arguing the minutia of this, it's just understanding the broad concept. Okay. In the hybrid category, we have things like your primary residence, cash, certain types of jewelry. These are things that basically, under certain circumstances, can function like an asset. In other cases, they don't lose all of their value, but they do lose a significant portion, or at least a sizable portion. In the case of the primary residence, because our government meddles so much in the housing market and creates these bubbles, and because of our federal system where we have 50 states that function semi-autonomously, and people are always moving to new states to try to take advantage of their economic situations, their laws. It creates these bubbles and mini bubbles and location-specific bubbles, I guess you call it, where your primary residence can double or triple in value. And in that case, when you actually go to sell it, maybe it will be an asset if you realize a triple or quadruple gain. But it's best to think of your primary residence as a liability, actually, because the interest you pay on the mortgage, the upkeep, the insurance, that all has to be factored into the sale price. And there's no guarantee that when you go to sell, it's going to be worth 2, 3, 4 times, like it has been for many people in the past few years. Cash is also great to have, but our system is built so that cash loses value. Officially, it loses 2% a year. I think they gave up on the 2% mark, and now they're saying 3% is their target, 3% inflation. We all know inflation is actually much higher. It's probably 7 to 10% in recent years. So cash is great to have. It's better to have cash than no cash for sure. But even if you have it in a high yield savings account, you're probably losing purchasing power on cash. It's kind of a hybrid. You're not losing that much, but you are losing. Jewelry as well. Many people think jewelry is an asset, but jewelry has such a markup built into it for creative purposes that finding the right buyer for that's going to pay full price for used jewelry usually doesn't materialize. However, jewelry is made of gold, silver, platinum. I'm not too sure about how diamonds function. I think diamonds are kind of a ripoff in general, but any kind of jewelry, you're basically going to take a hit when you sell it, but it does retain some value for the materials, of course. If something's sterling silver, it has a floor for the metal value, even if nobody wants that particular creative design that you liked originally. So there are some kind of hybrid categories here. It's important to be aware of. But the point of this video is we really have to start training ourselves to constantly ask ourselves, where's my money going? And it's less important to argue about what is the best asset. This is where a lot of people are arguing constantly. They're saying, you have to put your money in stocks. That's where it's at. That's the most popular. It's the government approved asset category, or you have to put it in real estate. Everybody, whoever got wealthy was in real estate. It's less important to argue about that than it is to shift your purchases from non-essential liabilities into assets. Basically, I'm saying, in my opinion, if you buy the worst asset over buying like beer, which is the quintessential non-essential liability, it goes to zero almost instantly after you drink it. If you take your beer money and you buy even the worst asset class, you're going to be better off. That is my point here. That's the point with this video. And that's where, when we talk about the real paper assets that we've been talking about, and we're going to continue to talk about on this channel, historical documents, currency, rare books, autographs, things like that. They may not be the absolute best asset. They may not be the absolute theoretical best you can do with that tranche of money. But if that money came from this category into here, you're better off. So that's the main point of this. And really just breaking that generational trauma that's been passed down. Like, I know I'm completely descended from Ellis Island immigrants. I was not taught this, and I had to pick it up slowly. And it wasn't really until my mid to late 20s that I started to realize this. And it can be very, very difficult. It's easy to watch a YouTube video and watch somebody explain this. It can be very, very difficult to break those decades, or even the majority of a lifetime of kind of mental conditioning or brainwashing into operating into this model where you work, trade time for money, labor gets transferred to money, and then the money leaves you, right? That's how most people still operate. That's how their families have operated for many generations. They work, they get money, they buy liabilities, mostly essential, but then whatever's left over goes to non-essential. We don't have to do that. We can start choosing to operate more like the rich. We don't have to leverage everything because we probably don't have giant pool of capital. We don't have the connections to bail us out when things go wrong with like real estate deals and stuff. But we can start to do some of these things and start acquiring assets instead of the non-essential liabilities. So I think that's the main point of that video. I hope this was helpful. I will say one last thing. This is becoming more and more critical because we're in the what they call the K-shaped economy now. Ever since 2020, and the rich, their net worth keeps going up. Everybody else, it's getting harder and harder. This is no longer a nice thing to have if you're interested in finance, if you're interested in personal wealth and reading these books and that kind of things. It's kind of becoming necessary for survival. And if you're Gen Z, especially, you're really feeling like there's no way I'm ever going to be able to save money. So even if you can't put this into practice right now and start buying assets, one thing you can do is start training your brain to ask this question every single day. Every time you make a purchase, just try to categorize it. If you start doing that and it becomes second nature, eventually you'll catch on and start doing this. And it took me a while as well. I know during the first Great Recession, there were opportunities right outside my window because there were so many storage units in my apartment complex that were being foreclosed on. And all you had to do was pay the tax that was owed to the county. And then you owned the storage unit that could generate monthly income. And I could have bought 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And I thought about it and I came close, but that little generational voice in the back of my head just said, nah, this is stupid. You're going to get burned, right? And I wasn't able to overcome that. And looking back at it, it was so clear. Yeah, that was a no-brainer purchase if you had the cash, because then you had an asset. You had storage units. You could either collect monthly rent from them or eventually sell them, probably get your money back plus a lot more, maybe at least some more. But I don't know where that money went. I don't know where that money went that I would have purchased those with. It probably went to these things. So just something to keep in mind. This is fundamental information. It's foundational. I know it wasn't the most exciting video, but it's something that needs to be at the bedrock of how we approach purchasing assets, paper assets, collectibles, just how we live our lives in general. So I'm going to ask you to subscribe to the channel, History Inscribed. Next week, we're going to get back to talking more about actual paper assets. In particular, the kinds of sellers that sell paper assets, and then we'll probably follow that up with how to actually make money, the different ways you can make money purchasing and collecting paper assets. So once again, thanks for watching History Inscribed. I'll see you next time.